What's good? It's Woog. There are a couple fights taking place this weekend, neither of which is a huge fight, but I definitely want to get into both of them. Whereas normally I'll cover one fight per video in a lot of these previews, I actually want to cover both of these fights in one video. One of them I feel is more interesting than the other, and they are both title fights for what it's worth, even though the Rolly Romero versus Ismael Barroso fight is for a vacant 140-pound title. And the reason that that's a vacant title fight is because the previous owner of that WBA 140-pound title, Alberto Puello, who had beaten Batir Akhmedov to earn that belt, he tested positive for PEDs in the lead up to this, or what was originally supposed to be Alberto Puello defending his belt against Rolly Romero. So since Puello got stripped of the belt, now it's Romero versus late replacement Ismael Barroso for the vacant belt. And I have to be honest, I'm not a huge believer in Rolly Romero. I do appreciate the entertainment in his personality. It's just that when you see such a rudimentary skill set, and I know that he's boxing at a high level. I mean, he was just in the ring with Gervonta Tank Davis, and quite frankly, he did better against Tank Davis than Ryan Garcia did. And I'm not about to A is greater than B and B is greater than C. Therefore, I'm not going to do any of that with those three fighters. But I'll just say Rolly Romero exceeded my expectations in that fight against Tank Davis. But if you look at his couple fights before that, I mean, namely the fight against Jackson Marinez, who we have since seen get stopped by Frank Martin, and before that got stopped by Richard Comey. But during that, we'll call it the COVID 2020 summer, there was a fight between Rolly Romero and Jackson Marinez, and I really thought that Jackson Marinez outboxed Romero. And the couple of times that I had seen Romero fight before that Marinez fight, even in the fights that Romero was winning, usually via knockout, like the fourth round knockout of Andres Figueroa, you can watch that fight and you see how committed Rolly Romero is to every single one of his punches. Like even when he was throwing his jab in the first round, he was throwing the jab like he was trying to hit a home run with the thing. And there was really no variation of like taking something off some of the punches to disguise the harder punches, tucked within like a 3-punch combination. No, he's pretty much one speed. Everything is hard. And granted, I did see some improvements in his recent fights, again, against Gervonta Tank Davis and against Anthony Yiggett, where he scored an impressive 7th round knockout of Anthony Yiggett. You did start seeing him, disguise his harder punches a little bit better. You saw a little bit more nuanced of an attack to where he was really whipping a nice counter left hook. I mean, granted, he did throw a nice counter left hook against Figueroa, but you did start to see some growth in Rolly's game. I just don't know if it's enough. Well, I know that it's still not enough growth to merit a lot of the trash talk that he delivers, but granted, that's a part of the persona. That's largely why he got that fight against Gervonta Tank Davis. I mean, he is a physically gifted kid. And, his dad, I believe, was like a multiple-time national champ. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But he does have a lot of physical tools. It's easy to see him get outsmarted by like a crafty back foot fighter who's waiting to knock your head off with a counter like Gervonta Davis. But I mean, I figure if Rolly Romero was going to be in the ring against Alberto Puello, I was about to favor Puello, or at least pick Puello in that matchup. So I think that, I mean, it's only in boxing where a fighter with the resume of Rolly Romero could be fighting for a major title at a weight class that he's never even competed in. But it's one of those things where since the event is already booked, right? You've got the venue, you've got the date and so forth. And, it's not like Alberto Puello was the bigger name of the two. Yes, he is one of the guys trained by Bob Santos, but Rolly Romero was going to be the bigger name of the two. But again, I would have gone with Alberto Puello. I just think that he's a little bit further along in his, skill development. I mean, just before COVID, Rolly Romero was fighting nothing but like 4-rounders and 6-rounders. It wasn't until like February or March of 2020 where he actually fought anything longer than a 6-rounder. And I think that even that was an 8-rounder. So, I mean, you look at his record, he's 14-1. His opponent here, by the way, Ismael Barroso, is 24-3-2. But Rolly Romero's experience level, even though he has been in there with Tank Davis, it's pretty damn thin. And I wonder, being that this is his first fight since Tank Davis, and now he's going up to 140, where Rolly Romero, he's not a tall guy. He's like 5'7". So he was always looking like a big lightweight. I don't think that's going to be the case at 140. I mean, he does have pretty broad shoulders and he's built pretty muscularly, but everything from his punching power to his punch absorption, not to mention, again, his lack of sweet science, at least as far as I see it, I think that it's going to spell problems if he's going to fight any of these, upper echelon 140 guys. Like, I really wonder how he would do against Gary Antoine Russell, or even the guy who one of the belt holders, Subriel Matias, just beat. Like, I would have loved to have seen a fight like Rolando Romero versus Hedimidas Ponce. But, all things considered, I do think that as far as late replacements go, this is going to be a good experience for Rolly Romero. Ismael Barroso, he has fought for a title. It was a few years ago. It was down at lightweight against Anthony Corolla. You probably remember him from getting knocked out by Vasily Lomachenko, perhaps. Or you might have remembered his couple of fights against then champion Jorge Linares. But Anthony Corolla ended up knocking Barroso out in the 7th round. Barroso, he's a very tough fighter. He's got a lot of power. He's, got 22 knockouts out of his 24 wins. So there could be fireworks in this one. But I would say the caveat to this fight is Ismael Barroso is now 40 years old. I think that a physical Rolly Romero, as long as he doesn't leave his chin out there too much when he's kind of coming in hot and heavy with his attack, as long as he doesn't just get blasted by Barroso, which, I mean, that is a big if. Barroso, he reminds me a little bit of, Miguel Mariaga, when Mariaga was, before Mariaga started racking up more and more losses. I'm saying Mariaga from a few years ago. Ismael Barroso reminds me a little bit of him. Now, Barroso is a southpaw like Tank Davis, so this is going to be another southpaw that Rolly Romero is going to be facing. Barroso likes to, come forward. He likes to throw punches to the body. He's kind of one of those rough and tumble guys who fights on his front foot, as does Rolly Romero. I would have really liked to have seen Rolly Romero go against another back foot style fighter. But, in terms of entertainment, again, for as long as this fight lasts, it might be a lot of fun. And I wouldn't be totally surprised if Rolly Romero gets hurt early against Ismael Barroso. Somebody with the experience level of Barroso, I think he's going to have a little something for Rolly Romero. But, I am going to take Rolando Romero to beat Ismael Barroso. I was leaning decision, but I might still go decision on this one. I do respect Ismael Barroso's resume. And if you look at his fights, even the fights that he gets knocked out, he has his moments usually of hurting his opponent, whether you're talking about his knockout loss against Batir Akhmedov or even in his decision loss against Isa Chanayev. Go look that one up. That was actually a pretty damn good fight. But, even that fight is like 5 years ago. So the difference between 35 years old and 40 might as well be a lifetime in boxing years. But, Barroso is on a 4-fight win streak. So look, I expect Rolly Romero to be on his front foot as he usually is, but I don't think he's gonna stupidly march him down. I don't think that he's gonna be too reckless. I think that when he sees Barroso, maybe not so much in the first round, because I think it's gonna take a while for the 40-year-old to get started. Maybe Rolly Romero surprises us all and ends up hurting and maybe dropping Barroso in the first couple of rounds. But if this one gets into like the 3rd and 4th round, it's going to be interesting to see how Rolly Romero conducts himself in terms of his level of patience and in terms of how he's able to handle Ismael Barroso's attacks. I've seen Rolly Romero fight more non-aggressive fighters, and I know it's crazy to think of Tank Davis as a non-aggressive fighter, but he's a scientist in there. I'm saying somebody who's going to be coming forward and pressing the attack on you and not respecting your power because of what they're trying to administer punishment-wise. Barroso, I think, is going to be a fighter who's not totally enamored with Rolly Romero's physical gifts. I mean, if you look at a lot of Romero's earlier fights, he was fighting guys who were just kind of shelling up. And basically they were looking like they were waiting for their own execution. Like they didn't fight like they thought they were going to win. They were more so covering up and just giving Romero too much respect when they saw how hard he was throwing. And again, Rolly Romero will come out in the first round and you could hear him grunting when he's throwing that jab, grunting when he's throwing that lead left hook. Look for Rolly Romero's left hook. I think that that's going to do some damage to Barroso. But I'm also looking for Rolly Romero to establish the right hand. And I think that, I was, out of respect for Barroso's experience, going to say Rolly Romero wins this one via decision, but I'm going to say he's going to stop Ismael Barroso somewhere between like the 6th and the 8th round. Again, this is a fight that's scheduled for 12. Rolly Romero has been the entire 12-round distance. He was against Jackson Marinez, again, in a fight that I thought he got outboxed, and I thought that Marinez deserved that decision. But I'm going to go with Rolly Romero via mid to late round, like late mid round stoppage over Ismael Barroso. Again, it's just hard to picture a 40-year-old hanging with somebody as physical as Romero, whose power kind of carries late. Like he does have a 7th round. He's got 2 7th round knockouts against Avery Sparrow and against Anthony Yiggett. And probably, that's Rolly Romero's best win against Anthony Yiggett, somebody who I believe is a former title contender. But yeah, I'm taking Rolly Romero to beat the 40-year-old Ismael Barroso via mid-round stoppage. But again, I'm not totally sold on Rolly Romero. I'm going to look for some skill development in this fight. This is going to be a good opportunity for Rolly Romero to get some quality rounds in and to you don't have to try to knock the guy out every single round. I'm looking for some evolution to Rolly Romero's game. And it's crazy to make this fight sound like he's fighting like somebody who's going to be in there as a sparring partner, because again, this fight is for the title, and only in boxing can you have Rolly Romero at this juncture of his career fighting for a 140-pound title. But let's move on to Janibek Alimkhanuly versus Steven Butler. Alimkhanuly is 13-0 with 8 knockouts, which is interesting because Janibek was, kind of seen as being the boogeyman, but only 8 knockouts out of his 13 wins. But he does have power. He's going to be defending his WBO middleweight title against Steven Butler. 32 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. Steven Butler, a couple of years ago, if you saw the 2 consecutive losses to Ryota Murata and to Jose Macias, you would have thought that Steven Butler was far away from earning a title shot. But since then, he's been on a 4-fight win streak, the 3rd of which was against Mark DeLuca, who you might remember Kell Brook fighting right before COVID. And then in his most recent fight against Joshua Conley, not Joshua Clottey, but Conley. This, I believe, was a Triple G sparring partner a few years back. But this fight is actually a little bit more interesting than it looks on its surface, because Steven Butler likes to come forward like Janibek Alimkhanuly does. And Steven Butler, like Janibek, likes to do a lot of feinting. Now, Janibek is a southpaw. Steven Butler is orthodox. But Janibek, like Steven Butler, they like to do the foot feints specifically, where they kind of do like a little stomp to try to draw a reaction and then let their backhand go. Janibek, he does that a ton. It worked perfectly against Danny Dignam, knocked him out in the 2nd round. Just look at his foot feints in that one. Some people like to feint with the hands, some people like to feint with the head, some with the shoulders or elbows, and then some like to feint with their feet. Janibek likes to feint with his feet, but he also does change levels a lot. So it's constant motion. He's constantly doing like this, and he does it so much that I feel like the frequency of him doing it almost reduces the effectiveness of doing it. So it's almost like if you throw, too many hard right hands, it's like, okay, they can kind of see it coming and gauge it now. It's one thing if you're going to feint, a few times around, or if you switch up your style of feints and kind of sprinkle them in and then put your punches behind it. But I swear, if you look at like Janibek's last fight against Denzel Bentley, which we're going to get to that fight in a second, but that feint wasn't working the same, and then he just increased the frequency of doing it, but he wasn't getting the reaction from Bentley that he was looking for. So it was almost like a stalemate, because what Janibek likes to do is he'll feint, foot feint again, and then foot feint, and then put a left hand behind it. He'll throw the left hand to the body, he'll throw it up top, he'll throw it in a straight way, and he'll throw it as kind of like a scooping hook. So he does mix up the style of left hand that he throws, and he's got a pretty decent lead hand. Not as convinced, and a pretty good jab, but it's really the left hand that he likes to deploy. And he's largely relying on you reacting to his foot feints to let that punch go. I mean, once he lets that left hand go and he's already inside on you, then he'll put like a hard right hand lead, right hand hook behind it and start mixing some combinations in there. But when you saw him fight Denzel Bentley, and by the way, his reputation, because there's such a recency bias, like we'll look at somebody like they are like the next coming, right? And then they have like one fight where they look a little pedestrian. It's just kind of like a type of performance. And all of a sudden you have a lot of critics poking holes in your game. That's just how boxing works. Like, for instance, if David Morrell, who just, obliterated Falcao, if that fight ended up going the distance and it was kind of like a 9 rounds to 3, 8 rounds to 4 style fight, it started becoming less eventful towards the end. Maybe the crowd started booing because of a lack of activity. You would have a totally different present narrative of David Morrell Jr. But no, he just obliterated for Falcao. So everybody's saying, oh, let's have him fight Benavidez. I mean, I would love to see it, but that's just how recency bias works. So the public is kind of cooled off on Janibek just a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, because of his recent performance against Denzel Bentley. I personally think that he's a pretty good fighter, but I'm on some, cool it, in terms of the hyperbole in how good Janibek might be. Like, I would have picked, if Golovkin were to have fought Janibek like a year ago, I would have still favored Golovkin over Janibek. If Demetrius Andrade were to have fought Janibek, I would have probably picked Andrade to win that fight. So I'm not here to say that Janibek is not a very good fighter, or that, he might not be a potential future Hall of Famer. I'm just saying the jury's really still out on how sophisticated his game is or isn't. We just don't have enough of a sample size to really go on. Yes, he did knock Rob Brandt out in the 8th round. Yes, he did knock Hassan N'Dam out in the 8th round, and those were in back-to-back fights. I feel like a lot of people kind of built their rep on stopping a post-prime Hassan N'Dam. Like, for a while, the only guy to have beaten Hassan N'Dam was like Peter Quillen, Kid Chocolate. But since then, he got, I think, knocked out by Ryota Murata, got knocked out by Callum Smith, and, got knocked out most recently by Janibek. It's just one of those things where a former WBA regular belt holder, because he actually beat Murata, and then Murata beat N'Dam in the rematch. But yeah, somebody who's like a former belt holder, multiple time interim belt holder, multiple time title challenger, Hassan N'Dam, you usually, if you stick around long enough, end up being, the person who the next up-and-comers start feasting on to build their rep, right? So count Janibek as, the latest of a few who have beaten, Hassan N'Dam. So Janibek, I think, is a very good fighter. I think that he's going to have an easier time, I believe, against Steven Butler, who, again, who's a hard hitter, who comes forward and who really might have his moments against Janibek. Like, I haven't seen Janibek have to fight on his back foot. Again, I've seen him, chase guys down. I've seen him chase guys down with ease, like he did, again, against Danny Dignam. And I've seen him chase guys down with a lot more difficulty, like against Denzel Bentley, who, by the way, got knocked out by Felix Cash. And I really want to see Felix Cash up against some upper echelon fighters. Like, I'm a little bit bullish on him. I think that he might have some of the goods. How many goods? We don't know. But in that fight against Denzel Bentley, the apprehension from Janibek was because, again, he wasn't getting the reaction from Bentley that he wanted. And if you start coming in, throwing those left hands, you run the risk of getting countered effectively because, Denzel Bentley has good timing and he's got better hand speed than Janibek. So those were a couple issues he was running into, and he looked like he was kind of tentative to let his hands go because Bentley was so patient, wasn't biting on the feints, and was countering anytime Alimkhanuly was coming in heavy, especially in the middle and late rounds. So yeah, that was a matchup stylistic issue for Janibek. I don't think he's going to have the same stylistic issue here against Steven Butler. I think that Steven Butler is going to more or less be right where Janibek wants him. He's going to be in striking range. The question is, in this, for lack of a better term, potential firefight, who's going to catch who? Well, I think that Janibek has the better setups than Steven Butler. I don't know who's got the better power. I'm almost inclined to side with Steven Butler in the power category. Now, maybe the future will prove different, But yeah, I don't know who's the harder hitter between the two, but maybe I'm buying into the Janibek hype a lot, because if it wasn't for that, you would actually think that Steven Butler might have a decent shot in this fight. And Steven Butler has, he's had success since those back-to-back knockout losses, but he does have those back-to-back knockout losses. And they weren't too long ago. They were in 2019, and then the one against Jose Macias was in 2021. So this is relatively recently. I think Janibek is going to beat Steven Butler, and because of the styles and the fact that Steven Butler is a bit of a hunter himself and doesn't fight on his back foot, likes to come forward, I don't think that Steven Butler is going to all of a sudden turn into a sweet science back foot technician. I think he's going to more or less go, head hunting himself. But I think that Janibek is going to catch him, hurt him, and probably put him away. I would say in the middle rounds. But earlier, I had Rolly Romero, or have Rolly Romero stopping Barroso in like rounds 6 through 8. I've got Janibek stopping Steven Butler like somewhere between rounds like 4 through 6. So I think it's going to be an early-ish to middle round stoppage for Janibek over Steven Butler. But yeah, let me know what you think about both of these fights. Rolando Romero versus Ismael Barroso, and then Janibek Alimkhanuly, the undefeated southpaw middleweight belt holder. You notice I don't yet use the term champ. I don't know. I just personally feel like there's a higher threshold that needs to be met besides, winning a vacant title and then defending it once against Denzel Bentley. I get it. Different people have different variations of what they consider champ versus belt holder. Some people don't make any distinction at all. But I would at least like to see Janibek fight like a top 15 middleweight before I start calling him like an actual champion. You know what I mean? But let me know what you think about Romero versus Barroso and Janibek versus Steven Butler in the comments. Who do you see winning each of these fights? And what do you think the immediate future at 140 for Rolly Romero or Ismael Barroso, whoever comes away with the title, what their immediate future at 140 is? And then the same thing applies to Janibek versus Steven Butler. And you pretty much have to factor in their respective networks and promoters, right? Rolly Romero is with PBC, and then Janibek is with Top Rank. So you kind of have to assess that in terms of forecasting what their next few fights might look like. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.